Good. The Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium presents Transforming Guyana. In each episode, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis will tackle a different area of interest for transforming Guyana. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Transforming Guyana. I am Terrence Blackman, Chair and Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York. And today I wanted to talk about some work that myself and Rennie Parris has sort of done in relation to our election in Guyana, in relation to our electoral system in Guyana. We've sort of broadly titled this presentation, The Mathematics of Electoral Fragmentation, and in some way what we're attempting to do is to illustrate why in our context the mathematics of our vote, the structural mathematics of our voting system, in a way it rewards unity. As I sort of go through the slides, what I want you to keep in mind is to think about the way in which votes translate to seats and the efficiency of the translation of votes to seats in Guyana's parliament. And it's very sort of interesting conversation, which I think folks have not really had as effectively as perhaps they ought to. So let me look at my first slide. So we want to, as I've said, we want to explore, Guyana's electoral system, and really try to. I think the point I want to make is that it mathematically rewards political unity and it penalizes fragmentation. Many of you perhaps might not be aware, but Guyana's proportional representation system with the Hare Quota method creates, I believe, structural, and I think the mathematics bears me out, structural advantages for unified political blocs. And I think the question here is, with this unprecedented, 22 or so parties now contesting the September 2025 election, I think understanding these mathematical principles is crucial. The AFC-APNU split and the emergence of these new parties like the Forward Guyana, like WIN, I think they fundamentally changed the electoral mathematics. Let me say at the outset, though, that this is purely mathematical. It's not political in the sense. You see what I'm saying here is that regardless of which party benefits today, these same principles would apply if the roles were reversed. In a way, the system's mathematical structure is neutral, but the understanding that one should have is that it rewards unity over fragmentation. Right? And I think the question that you should keep in mind is that, as many of you I'm sure have wondered, why small parties sometimes struggle to gain representation even when they kind of receive significant vote shares. And I think I'm going to try to answer that question today. Okay, so I've set up where we're going, and so now want to help us to better understand why this fragmentation matters mathematically, I want us to kind of examine the current political landscape and then dive into how Guyana's electoral system actually works. Next slide. So the current landscape, I think we're all fairly familiar with this. President Ali has announced that where we'll have elections on September 1. GCOM has confirmed that we have about 22 parties contesting the election. I think we've seen the AFC-APNU split. We've seen most recently the Amanza Walton-Desir resignation from the PNCR to launch her Forward Guyana Movement. And so I think with just a few weeks until nomination day on July 14th, from a distance, the opposition landscape continues to fragment. Again, I will try to explain what I mean in this sense in the next slide. So this is the important aspect to understand. So Guyana employs what political scientists call a proportional representation system, but with several distinctive features that make it unique even among proportional representation systems worldwide. And understanding these features is really crucial because they directly impact on how the mathematics works. So unlike many proportional systems that use a single national calculation, Guyana divides the 65-seat National Assembly into two categories: 25, what are euphemistically called regional seats, and 40, what are called top-up seats, national seats. And so in a way, this dual system means that kind of when you vote, in a way you vote twice. You vote regionally or in the geographic constituency, as the expert would say. So it means, let's presume for a moment that you're simply voting once. A single vote is effectively casting two votes simultaneously, one for your regional representative and one for the national list. And the system uses something that is called the Hare Quota. And what it means is that, so I should say just a small bit, Hare is Thomas Hare is a 19th century English electoral reformer who advocated for fairer representation, and this formula, in some sense, the Hare Quota, effectively determines the price of a parliamentary seat in terms of votes. And I'll illustrate how that works in a moment. So this is the key to understanding, this slide is the key to understanding Guyana's electoral system. The Hare Quota is the mathematical foundation of the electoral. And so if you have a pencil and paper, as I would say to the students in my class, I want you to take it out. And so the way you compute the Hare Quota is by looking at the total number of valid votes divided by the number of seats. Right? So if we think about the 2020 elections, the total number of valid votes, 460,352, 65 seats. You divide 460,352 by 65, and you get 7,082 voters per seat. So in order to buy a seat in the parliament, a political party would need multiples of 7,082 votes. And as many multiples of that gives rise to the number of seats that you're able to purchase in the legislature. Now, Now, where it gets interesting, right? So, where it gets really interesting is in the regional context. So, when the formula, so when the formula is applied to the various regions, you see the same formula is applied separately to both the regional and national vote. And so every region has its own Hare quota based on the total number of votes and allocated seats. So you begin to understand why the fragmentation is going to matter. There's one more thing that I need to say here. So first, let me repeat, because this is essential for Guyana. The way votes are calculated, the way seats are bought in the parliament, the way votes translate into seats is by way of a formula called the Hare quota. The Hare quota takes the total number of valid votes and it divides it by the number of seats in the parliament, in our case, 65. In the case of the 2020 election, we had 460,352 total valid votes. The total number of seats, 65. 460,352 divided by 65 gives us 7,082 votes per seat. That's in the national sense. The point is, the same formula is applied separately in both the regional and national votes. So each region has its own Hare quota that is based on its total number of valid votes and allocated seats. Right? This is very important, and this is where the question of fragmentation becomes a structural mathematical issue. And let me show you how. So so now how do I allocate seats to a party? So I calculate the Hare quota. So I have the Hare quota, and then I take each party's votes and I divide it by the Hare quota, and I get an initial number of seats. That's the whole number. So you can, well, I should have perhaps added an example, but that's a whole number. So you can figure 7,082 by 1, 7,082 by 2. How many 7,082s will go into your number of votes? And then mark now with your pen and paper, there is a remainder, right? So there is an associated remainder in this context. So there are a certain number of leftover votes after the initial calculation. And this is the crucial thing. So the remaining seats are allocated to the parties with the largest remainders until all of the seats are filled. And it is in this context that fragmentation becomes a genuine problem. You know, what I've illustrated in the charts here, and I hope you can, the chart shows exactly how the 2020 election played out. The PPPC got 32 initial seats plus 1 remainder seat. APNU AFC got 30 initial seats plus 1 remainder seat. Small parties got 0 initial seats, but one remainder seat. The key insight, and this is the key insight, and it's why a fragmentation is deeply problematic, or at least fragmentation does not serve the fragments. Unification is better served. You see, the key insight is that the PPPC remainder was 6,653 votes, and that beat the APNU's remainder of 5,454 votes. And in some sense, it is that which gives them the crucial 33rd seat and parliamentary control. Let me maybe say that once more for you. The way this works, right? When you have computed the Hare quota, you divide each party's votes gets divided by the Hare quota, and that gives them the seat allocation. That's the whole number. How many times does it go into? How many times does the Hare Quota go into the total number of votes earned by the party in that geographic constituency or earned by the party nationally? Now, what is then is a leftover. It doesn't go exactly, so there's a remainder for those of you who did your early arithmetic. So there is a remainder, and the remaining remaining seats are allocated by way of the largest remainder. And I've put here so that you kind of get the sense of what's going on. The chart, which kind of shows exactly how the 2020 election played out. PPPC got 32 initial seats plus 1 remainder seat. APNU, AFC got 30 initial seats plus 1 remainder seat. Small parties got 0 initial seats, but one remainder seat. And the key mathematical insight is that the PPPC's remainder, 6,653, was larger than APNU AFC's remainder of 5,454 votes. And in some sense, it is this which gives the crucial 33rd seat and parliamentary control to the PPPC in the 2020 elections. So, see how this plays out in practice. Let me look at a concrete regional example. This is actually, I must say, as I went through this work, it was quite eye-opening for me. I had not, I had not fully appreciated how sophisticated the mathematical logic of our electoral system was. So I want us to try to walk through a hypothetical but sort of realistic example to see how the mathematics plays out in practice, right? And I think this example should illustrate why unity matters mathematically and not just politically. Okay, so let's set up the scenario, right? Imagine some region, call it X, and you have 5 seats and 50,000 valid votes, so that you understand how it works. So 50,000 votes divided by 5 seats. So let me note this question. I think you would need to understand the national top-up seats and the geographic seats are 2 different issues. Well, there is, so I will answer this question in a moment, but I think that let me send the structural story straight, and then, so there is a law. So I enshrined in the law are the total number of seats that are assigned to each geographic constituency. So I have that in the research notes. So there's a reason that, say, for example, Region 4 has 7 seats. There's a region that this region has X number of seats. And it's precisely this challenge that the fragmentation challenge emerges precisely in those regions where you have a small number of seats. And so if you have a small number of seats, it means that the Hare Quota in that region is much larger, and it means that the unified party has much better, is more likely to take the seat in that region. And let me first get the structural part of it right. But very good question. So for those of you who are seeing this for the first time and sort of never seen this, I thought I'd take a very small example to sort of illustrate. So let's say we have a hypothetical region with 5 seats and 50,000 valid votes. And so first I went to calculate the Hare Quota, which is the total number of valid votes divided by the number of seats. So 50,000 votes divided by 5 seats. So you need 10,000 votes per seat. So initial allocation, let's say the PPPC has 26,000 votes and the total united opposition has 24,000 votes in the 50,000 vote polity. So with 26,000 votes, you're going to be able to have 2 seats 2 times 10, 20,000, 6,000 remainder. The opposition with 24,000 votes, you have 2 times 10, 2 seats, 4,000 remainder. And then you have 1 seat remaining, and the 1 seat remaining goes to the PPPC because it has a remainder of 6,000 as opposed to the unified opposition remainder of 4,000. And so the PPPC gets allocated 3 seats from that hypothetical region, and the united opposition gets allocated 2 seats, right? So that's when things are unified. And so now I want to say, well, what happens if you go to a situation where you're not unified and fragmented? And so let's look at what the fragmentation world, brings. Right. So in a region with 5 seats, 50,000 votes, PPPC, unified opposition, 24,000 votes, 3-2. So now let's look at a region with 5 seats, 55, the same scenario, right? Well, the same scenario, 50,000 votes, nothing changes. The PPPC gets 26,000, but this time the unified opposition no longer has their unified 24,000. You know, one person has 12 and 4, 16 and 8. Now, immediately, opposition party number 1 does not have enough to purchase. So opposition party number 2 and 3 do not have enough to purchase a seat, right? And so you get the 2 seats being assigned to all of the opposition, but it's no longer a unified opposition, right? So PPPC still emerges with their 3, but now there's no, the 2 that goes to the opposition goes in a completely different direction, right? So the key point, you know, this fragmented scenario, you have 24,000 opposition votes. Now it's split among 3 parties, 12,000, 8,000, 4,000. The 12,000 party gets 1 initial seat plus 2,000 remainder. The 8,000 party gets 0 initial seats, but has an 8,000 remainder. The 4,000 party gets 0 initial seats, has a 4,000 remainder. The remainder seats go to the large party, so the 8,000 vote party gets 1 seat, and the PPPC still gets 1 seat. The final result, yes, similarly the same, 3 seats, opposition party, 2 combined seats. You see, the key insight, notice in this simplified scenario, the total seat distribution remains the same, but this is the best case scenario for a fragmented opposition. In reality, the disadvantages compound across multiple regions and in the national calculation, right? So I hope what you're seeing is the stark challenge mathematically of unity versus fragmentation. Right. So so maybe let me say that once again, right? The critical mathematical insight. This is not a political insight, and I'll say something at the end. Here's the key mathematical principle. When the opposition votes are fragmented, they compete against each other for remainder seats instead of presenting a unified challenge to the largest party. And you see the example that I made was sort of simplified. It shows the same final outcome in real world scenarios with multiple regions, varying vote distributions. These inefficiencies compound. You know, the remainder allocation really is the remainder allocation process is where fragmentation, you know, really hurts the opposition parties and and perhaps I want to do this just a little more in detail, right? Now, I want to really amplify what I'm calling sort of the remainder advantage, right? So again, and let me reiterate the point. The remainder allocation phase is where the mathematical advantage of unity becomes most apparent. This isn't about a political strategy. It's about arithmetic and how the largest remainder kind of interacts with party fragmentation. So again, I'll say, after the initial allocation, remainder seats go to parties with the largest vote remainder. So you want to think of these remainders as sort of leftover votes. There aren't quite enough votes to get a full seat. And so the party with the most leftover votes remaining gets the remaining seats, right? And so the unified opposition advantage, when the opposition is unified, their remainder competes directly with the PPPC remainder. It's a head-to-head competition for each remaining seat. The larger party usually wins. But the competition is direct and it's efficient. Fragmentation opposition disadvantage. So when the opposition is fragmented, multiple smaller parties compete with each other for the remainder seats, instead of one large remainder challenging another large remainder. And so you might have several smaller parties that individually can't compete effectively. And in the real world example, I mean, I pointed at the very beginning, in the 2020 election, this principle determined parliamentary control. The PPPC's remainder of 6,653 votes beat APNU AFC's remainder of 5,445 votes by just. And so if you think about this, the 33rd seat was won by just 1,199 votes. So if the data that I've read is correct, the 2020 election, turned on a difference in remainders of 1,199 votes. It is that small difference that gave the PPPC the crucial 33rd seat and parliamentary majority. And now you can only imagine if that APNU remainder had been split among multiple parties, the mathematical disadvantage would be much greater. And I've put here the 2020 election remainder chart. This chart shows the actual remainder votes from 2020, and you want to note how close the PPPC and APNU AFC remainders are. Small parties also won a remainder seat, but with fewer total votes. So the question, that's an interesting question. Could this anomaly be corrected by a law that the remainder seat must be allocated according to the agreement of parties commanding the? I don't know that they can do that. I'm just saying what the current law is, and so the point is, this is the current structure in which the game is being played, and so there is in this structure a remainder advantage, and so and I'm saying it's part of this talk is to sort of say, it might not be evident to, and again, I want to stress that this is not a question about political ideas and all of the other things that I think are really important, but it is simply a question of saying, how does the system work structurally, and does it advantage does it advantage unity over fragmentation? And the answer is that it advantages unity over fragmentation in its structural operation. And perhaps in the next slide, I can say something just about this. So these are sort of like regional threshold effects, right? So just so that, you know, the thing is, Guyana has no formal threshold requirement, but the mathematics of the system creates some informal thresholds that vary by regions. So these effective thresholds, in a sense, become higher in smaller regions, again, creating another disadvantage for fragmented parties. So in a say, what do I mean by a threshold? An effective threshold is kind of like the minimum percentage of votes needed to have a realistic chance of winning a seat. In a region with many seats, this threshold will come down. In a region with few seats, it's harder. This is not a formal rule, but it's kind of like the mathematical heuristic. So regional variation, right? So look at the chart showing the effective thresholds by region. In region 8, with one seat, you need approximately 50% of the votes to guarantee a seat. In region 4, with 7 seats, you need at around about 14.3% to guarantee a seat. And so in this variation should create different strategic considerations for parties. Right? Unified parties can more easily reach these thresholds compared to a fragmented opposition. In our, say, in our region Y, PPP wins single seat with 45% of the votes, even though 55% of the voters choose opposition parties. The opposition too fragmented to reach the effective threshold. And that's the point I'm trying to make over the course of this presentation. And so this kind of demonstrates a really key principle. In smaller regions, sort of vote efficiency becomes crucial. A unified party with 45% of the vote can beat 3 fragmented parties with 20, 18, and 17 respectively. The mathematics favors consolidation. I'm going to say that again. The mathematics favors consolidation. And in the 2020 election, one sees that the PPPC performed particularly well in smaller regions where these threshold effects are most pronounced. But the Unified APNU AFC coalition remained very competitive in larger regions like Region 4, but struggled in sort of single seat regions. Right. So this threshold chart really shows how dramatically thresholds vary. The mathematical reality is that fragmented parties face much higher barriers to representation in smaller regions. And in a sense, these regional effects are then compounded by the national top-up system, which can amplify rather than correct these inefficiencies. So let me say something about, someone mentioned earlier, the national top-up mechanism. So let me point that out now. So the national top-up system is really designed to ensure kind of overall proportionality, but it can actually amplify the advantages of unity when the opposition is fragmented. And it says this is the point. So this counterintuitive effect is really crucial to understanding Guyana's electoral mathematics. Right. So let me first explain the top-up purpose. So the 40 national seats are really meant to correct any disproportionality from the regional allocation. if a party's regional seats don't match their national vote share, they receive additional national seats to, in a sense, balance things out. So in theory, this should ensure a kind of perfect proportionality in the parliamentary representation. Now I want to share what this sort of amplification effect might look like from the fragmentation. See, when the opposition is fragmented, their combined inefficiency in regional seat conversion can actually be amplified rather than corrected by the national system. So if you're a small party, fail to win regional seats, small parties, you fail to win regional seats, but you might qualify for a national seat. But the individual inefficiencies means that the largest party often benefits more from an overall efficient conversion. Right? If you take, say, the 2020, right? If we take, say, the 2020 election as an example, the APNU AFC actually won more regional seats than PPPC, 13 versus 12. But the PPPC's stronger national vote share earned them more top-up seats, 21 versus 18. This, once again, if you understand this, if you read the mathematics correctly, this gave PPPC their parliamentary majority despite losing regional seat count. What's the mathematical insight here? So this demonstrates that really the dual system rewards parties that consistently perform across both regional and national calculations. Fragmented opposition might win some regional seats, but they're going to struggle to achieve the national vote share needed for a substantial top-up allocation. Right? I mean, if you look at the bar chart that I've sort of presented there, you can see that this shows the 2020 breakdown, right? The blue bars, the regional seats, and the gold bars, the national top-up seats. And the thing you want to notice is that how the PPPC's national strength compensated for their regional weakness, while the APNU AFC's sort of regional strength wasn't enough to overcome their national shortfall. And I want to really sort of emphasize that these mathematical principles aren't just kind of theoretical, right? We can see their real world impact by examining the historical election results, and I'll just show you some of that. The 2020 election results, really, they give us a perfect case study for understanding how Guyana's electoral mathematics works when the opposition forces are unified. And in a sense, these results demonstrate, almost near perfect proportionality and efficient, this is what I meant by efficient vote to seat conversion. You can see the PPPC receives 50.69% of the votes, and it got 50.77% of the seats. That's a difference of just about 0.08. So your vote percentage is exactly what your seat percentage turns out to be. The APNU AFC received 47.34% of the votes and won about 47.69. So you see, even in the sense that they overperform. Their seat percentage in the parliament is actually more than their vote percentage in the election. When we're to count the votes. So the point is, it's this unity. It brings us as close to perfect proportionality as perhaps any electoral system can achieve. And actually, that was my really big insight into spending the time to do some research in this regard, is that Guyana does not have a really bad system, but it has a system that really requires two strong political parties to oppose each other. It's going to be very difficult for third parties to win the polity in Guyana. I know, again, this is not a question about. I want to reiterate what I've said. This is not a question of. This is not a question of political ideas. It is not a question of democracy and voices. It is simply a question of how to choose candidates that represent communities in some fair way. And the system that you have in place, and the one that we Guyanese have in place, is one that favors large unified blocks, just purely in its mathematical structure. I've just tried to say that, this near perfect proportionality occurred because the opposition contested as a unified APNU AFC coalition. Their combined vote share translated efficiently into parliamentary representation. There was no vote splitting, no competing remainder among opposition parties, and no thresholds effects working against them. Now, contrast this with the fragmented scenario contrast this election to earlier elections where the opposition was more fragmented. In 2006, for example, the PPPC won 54.6% of the votes, but secured 56.9% of the seats, a 2.3% point advantage. In 2011, the PPPC won 48% of the votes, 48.6% of the votes, and secured 50.8% of the seats. And so this ability to translate a 2.2% advantage, right? So this in some ways, this vote to seat efficiency is something that again favors unity, and it's something that we have to be mindful of. I have a few more slides, so let me move quickly. I wanted to stop at this point, but I have a few more slides, so permit me to with your indulgence kind of complete those. All right, so this vote to seat efficiency that I'm attempting to illustrate, really just gives you a kind of quantitative measure of how well parties convert their vote share into parliamentary representation. And so this metric kind of reveals real advantages and the disadvantages created by unity versus fragmentation, right? So first, let me sort of just give a definition of what I mean here. Efficiency is just the percentage of seats won divided by the percentage of votes received, and multiplied by 100. So I get some percentage, right? So score of 100, perfect proportionality, and scores below 100%, underrepresentation. So when we analyze 2020 efficiency, both major parties achieve near perfect efficiency, right? So I've just pointed that out. PPPC at about 100.2% and AFC-APNU AFC at about 100.7%. And again, what these scores are demonstrating is that when the opposition is unified, the system works almost exactly as designed. The smaller parties achieved a 78.2% efficiency, which is kind of reasonable given their sort of limited geographic presence. Now, to compare the historical trends. So the efficiency bars, you can see they show a clear pattern. In 2006, 2011, when the opposition was more fragmented, PPPC achieved overrepresentation, 104.2%, 104.5%, respectively, while the opposition parties suffered underrepresentation. The 2020 election broke this pattern up because of the opposition unity. And so the again the insight from the mathematical side of the ball is that this efficiency metric reveals very clearly that fragmentation doesn't just hurt opposition parties, it actually helps the largest party to achieve a kind of overrepresentation. And to the question that was raised, this isn't intentional bias in the system. It's a mathematical consequence of how the Hare Quota remainder applications interact with party fragmentation. And so I at this point I would sort of project for 2025. I would say that based on these mathematical principles we've tried to present here for you, we can project that the unprecedented fragmentation in 2025 will likely return to efficiency patterns similar to 2006, 2011, and in some case the largest unified party will very likely achieve some overrepresentation, while the fragmented parties will suffer some underrepresentation, right? So again, I want to point to the vote to seat efficiency comparison axis across elections. And the chart makes clear the correlation between, opposition unity and electoral efficiency. And, the 2020 results is really stands out in a sense as a kind of anomaly of efficiency. 2006, 11, and certainly 2015. These historical patterns, I think, take on some new significance when we consider this unprecedented fragmentation that is a part of the landscape for 2025. Let me just say a few more. Let me make a few more points before closing. I've just kind of for folks who are looking at this. I know folks look at this in many parts of the world. Just to give some broad sense, is that the Guyana Elections Commission has confirmed, that we have about 22 political parties contesting our September 2025 election. The PPPC, the APNU AFC, and the AFC, and we're now seeing the emergence of Forward Guyana Movement, the ANUG, WIN, which kind of I sort of prepared my slides before the really serious emergence of WIN. So this, if I were to just think, just go from 3, if you went from 3 to 22, it's a 650% increase in the number of political parties, right? So we've gone from a 3-way competition to a 22-way competition. And it could potentially be a harbinger of a fundamental restructuring of our electoral mathematics, and a movement away from our competitive 2-party system with a small third option. I can't say with absolute certainty where we'll go, but what I do know is that this unprecedented the fragmentation will have profound mathematical consequences. And maybe I'll just say 2 or 3 more slides before I close. Right. So we're now completely at the place where the AFC and APNU have split nominally. I don't know if there's an opportunity for them to find a way back. And we now have the emergence of sort of multiple new parties, and what I've argued here is that this creates a mathematical scenario that will most likely result in the most inefficient opposition vote to seat conversion in Guyana's modern electoral history. If we assume like if we assume the former coalition vote of 47.34% from 2020 splits among multiple parties, then the mathematical disadvantage grows exponentially. Instead of one unified remainder competing against the PPPC, we might have dozens of smaller remainders competing against each other. You know, these opposition parties, obviously the APNU, AFC under Nigel Hughes, each of these represents a potential slice of what was once a more unified opposition vote. And perhaps just to give some sense, you know, if you take a hypothetical scenario, but realistic scenario, where the PPPC gets exactly what they got the first time around, 50.7% of the vote share, but the opposition votes split where say APNU gets 25, AFC gets 15. I mean, I think that might be generous, but let's just for the moment assume the strengths of the political parties like that. Of the original 47.34 that you had, you now have 25 go to APNU, 15 go to AFC, 3 go to FGM, 2 go to WIN or ANUG. This fragmentation would likely result in the PPPC achieving significant overrepresentation, possibly reaching about 55 to 60% of the seats, maintaining exactly the same vote share. And so, you know, this fragmentation would really hit hardest in the smaller regions. In a small region, the PPPC could win with as little as 35 to 40% of the vote if the opposition split the remaining 60 to 65%. In larger regions, some opposition parties, you know, will still win seats, but their combined efficiency will be much lower. And this I can say with some mathematical certainty. Regardless of the specific vote distribution, the mathematical principles that I'm discussing here today, that we've discussed here today, guarantee that this level of fragmentation will benefit the largest unified party. This is not speculation. This is arithmetic, right? And so you can see, you know, the fragmentation pie chart, as I call it. You know, this hypothetical distribution shows how the mathematics could play out, right? No, and the point I want you to see is that even with the PPPC maintaining the same vote share, the fragmentation of the opposition votes creates a mathematical advantage that could, and I think most likely will, translate into disproportionate parliamentary representation. And, you know, I think these fragmentation effects aren't just academic concerns. I think they have real implications for governance in Guyana. And so maybe just to synthesize, we've sort of examined the mechanics. We've looked at the historical evidence. We've said something about the current landscape, and I think we can now synthesize the key sort of mathematical principles that create structural advantages for unified parties in Guyana's electoral system. And so I've kind of called them principle one, kind of quota efficiency, so that the idea of unified parties convert votes to seats more efficiently through the quota system because they're more likely to reach the Hare quota needed for the initial seat allocation. Fragmented parties will often fall short of the quota, and so will have to rely more heavily on the remainder allocation, where they will also face some additional disadvantage. Principle two, I call that the remainder advantage. In the remainder allocation, as we saw before, unified parties compete more effectively because they present larger remainders that can compete head-to-head with other major parties. And fragmented parties present multiple smaller remainders that often compete against each other rather than challenging the largest party. And principle 3, which I call the threshold effects, so higher effective thresholds in small regions penalize fragmentation more severely. A unified party with 40% of the vote can beat multiple fragmented parties that have 60% added up together among them. And the sort of cumulative effect, these 4 principles work together to create a mathematical environment that strongly favors the argument that I presented at the beginning, that strongly favors unity over fragmentation. And it's not linear. It compounds across regions and between region and national calculations. I feel this little radar chart. It shows the dramatic difference in mathematical advantage between unified and fragmented entities. And, the unified, I've showed the unified in gold, high scores across all 4 principles, and the fragmented are shown in blue as kind of fragmented scores poorly across all of these measures: quota efficiency, remainder advantage, threshold effects, top-up amplification. And so finally, I suppose I come to the end of what I wanted to say today. This is, if you might think of this as kind of like my letter to my colleagues in Guyana. I think as we conclude this analysis today, it's really important to emphasize 2 things. We've looked purely at mathematical principles that operate regardless of political preference or party loyalty. And, these are the principles, like them or not, that will shape the September 2025 election outcome in ways that transcend your traditional political analysis. And, the mathematics of Guyana's electoral, this is my summary. This is my takeaway from the mathematics of Guyana's electoral system creates structural advantages for unified parties through more efficient vote-to-seat conversion, advantages in the remainder allocation, higher effective thresholds that penalize fragmentation, and in the sort of national top-up calculations, and that can amplify these inefficiencies, these regional inefficiencies, right? So 2025 is an unprecedented world. You're looking at, in a list, 22 parties not contested. The mathematical disadvantage for the fragmented opposition, I think, grows exponentially. And I think this will represent one of the more severe tests of these principles in Guyana's modern electoral history. And, I would say that based on our analysis, I think we can reasonably project that the 2025 election will likely see a return of the efficiency patterns of 2006, 2011, where the largest unified party achieved overrepresentation while fragmented opposition suffered underrepresentation. The scale of the fragmentation effect, I suppose the scale of the fragmentation suggests that this effect could be more pronounced than in previous elections. And, I want us to understand that these mathematical realities have implications beyond electoral outcomes. The balance of power between they affect, obviously the representation of the representativeness of our parliament, and the balance of power between the government and the opposition, and ultimately the quality of democratic governance in Guyana. So, let me close by also saying this: like, this analysis makes no judgment about the political merits of unity versus the diversity of political voices, right? The voters in Guyana and the parties in Guyana must weigh these, I'm simply saying, weigh these mathematical realities against the other important political considerations, ideological alignment, governance philosophy, representation of diverse constituencies, etc. I can point to the visual reference here. The efficiency projection chart. I mean, the likely efficiency outcomes for 2020 is stark. And I notice here Peter Emraker. Thank you for joining all the way from the UK. I notice your question here, if the knowledge of these I don't think the knowledge of these inefficiencies was widespread. I think this is, if you will, a small contribution to the conversation, the political conversation. I think many of us reasonably felt that that there would be an understanding that the parties had a template for unification, and I don't think that. I think we have to trust the judgment of the political actors in Guyana to make the decision about how they want to do things. I mean, I think I've just pointed out that I'm not making a judgment about the political merits of unity versus diversity or the political voices. I'm simply saying that the structure of our electoral process favors two large unified blocks. And I'll go back to my sort of analysis to say that there these elements, which I hope are understood at this point, what I mean by quota efficiency, efficient conversion of votes to seats, remainder advantage, getting allocated the remainder seats, the threshold effects, having enough votes in a geographical constituency or in the top-up competition to purchase a seat, and then the top-up amplification that goes with that. I'm simply saying that these are structural realities, and I'm leaving it on the groups of the folks perhaps might not have been aware fully of the structural realities in some of the conversations around making decisions relative to whether or not to unite, etc. This is a mathematical analysis. Maybe the political scientists know much better than the mathematicians do, but I won't make a judgment. I have many good colleagues who are political scientists. But I also know the mathematicians know what the mathematicians know, and they tend to know it fairly well. And so I want to thank everyone for joining, and I want to thank Rennie Parris, who is sort of my colleague on this research journey. And I want to thank you all for joining from various parts of the world. As I saw you there, Peter, thank you for joining us all the way from the UK. And I know many people in other parts of the world have joined in for us. So, I think we've covered kind of some complex mathematical principles, but I hope I've tried to make them accessible and relevant to understanding Guyana's electoral dynamics. And, I wish we had more time for questions, but I will, leave this for us. I want to encourage folks to think about this issue within the context of the election, to write about this issue, to actually, give a thought to, the things that we've discussed today. They operate regardless of our political preferences, and understanding them is crucial for voters, parties, and analysts, as I think we approach what promises to be really a pivotal election in Guyana's history. And I want to thank you for your engagement and encourage you to reach out to the Guyana Business Journal to further discuss these issues, right? And thank you very much. And I should say, support us in any way that you can, and visit our website and read some of the articles. I know that many of you visit. I'm actually quite surprised sometimes as to the I must say I'm surprised and overwhelmed at the response of the folks who who value a different kind of thinking and value logical thinking in this context. So thank you, colleagues. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.